On this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe, we're talking and breaking down the guard position for the Pistons ahead of the season. Will Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey prove they fit together? Could Malik Beasley be the team's starting shooting guard? The Pistons have signed Lamar Stevens. We talk about that. And we also take some mailbag questions. All that and more ahead on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Let's do it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. It's myself, Aaron Johnson, and joining me all the way over in Italy, so jealous, but so happy for him at the same time. It's my good friend, Jasper Apollonia. Jasper, how we doing over there? And thanks for hopping on at, midnight local time to talk about the offseason Detroit Pistons.
Brother, it's never too early. It's never too late to talk about our Detroit Pistons. And it's never too far away to talk about them either. I mean, dude, I'm just here. I'm scouting the next Simone Fontecchio, the next Luigi Datome. I mean, come on, man. Sorry, it's horrible because I've been here for like a little over a week, and I'm just pronouncing everything so more Italian. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way, and I wouldn't be anywhere else on a beautiful midnight in Italy other than talking to you. So let's get into it, brother.
It's great because, yes, it's still technically the offseason, but I'm calling this the final podcast of the offseason. Media Day is on Monday. This podcast is coming out the Friday before Media Day. You go into Media Day, training camp starts the same week. You're then into preseason. The offseason's over. The offseason's done. This is the final podcast of the offseason. And so we've got some great stuff to talk about as we cap off the 2024 offseason for the Detroit Pistons. But before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to our weekly sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the game. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. Quick shout out to the Palace of Pistons Substack. Some content that's been coming out recently over there. We have had the weekly drive from Mike Anguilano, who sadly is not able to join us this week. But we've also had the beginning of our positional previews coming out on palaceofpistons.com. Last week, we had the Bigs positional preview come out, written by Dylan Edenfield. And this week, Donovan Collins wrote about the guards position, which we're going to talk about today as well. But want to give a quick shout out to palaceofpistons.com. Head on over and subscribe. It's completely free. You'll get all of our content sent directly to your email. Please go over there and do that. Also, take a moment, wherever you're watching or listening from, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, hit the like button, leave a comment. All that stuff really, really helps. I really, if I could ask of anything from you, it's to do that before we start this upcoming season of Detroit Pistons basketball. But without further ado, let's get into our first topic, and that is the guards position of the Detroit Pistons roster. Donovan wrote a really good breakdown, kind of highlighting all of the players in that category. It's mainly Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Malik Beasley, and Marcus Sasser. Those are the 4 main guards. You know, you could see some Tim Hardaway Jr. at the 2 tight minutes. But when you think of traditional guards, the Pistons got 4. And so it's a pretty wide variance in terms of talent. Obviously, at the top of the order, it's Cade Cunningham. At the bottom, it's pretty clearly Marcus Sasser. And then you've got Malik Beasley and Jaden Ivey in between who, when you look at what they're good at, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, they probably end up being pretty equal players overall. But let's start at the top with Cade Cunningham. Clearly the alpha dog of the Detroit Pistons, clearly the franchise cornerstone, signed the maximum rookie contract extension this offseason. What does the season ahead look like for Cade Cunningham?
It's a great question. This is, I think, probably going to be the most important season of Cade Cunningham's career. And that's not to say that he doesn't have bigger things in front of him. Doesn't mean that he hasn't had bigger obstacles behind him. But I think this is the year really where you're going to see exactly what Cade Cunningham is. Future Ringer columnist Zach Lowe recently said he's taking the over on 3.5 All-Star appearances for Cade Cunningham. And I think this is the year where you're going to really see if that's true or not, genuinely, because this is the first time that the Pistons have had any sort of a roster that makes sense around him. Players that have genuine quality on both ends of the court. And that's not to say that this is some great roster by any means, but it's a roster that makes sense for a guy of his skill set. And frankly, I think when you look at the other young guards in this league that have made all-star teams before they're 24, 25, they've done it with imperfect teams around them. They've done it with not incredible circumstances. I'm talking your LaMelo Balls, guys like that, guys in that kind of range. And I just think that if Cade is going to be that kind of guy, and I think we're both in agreement that we still believe he is, but if he is that guy that we believe he is, this is the season it's got to become apparent, right? It can't just be like the same as it was last year. You can't have the good numbers, but underlying inefficiencies. You can't have good numbers, but you don't win any games. There has to be progress made this season. So yeah, for me, I think this is an incredibly important season for Cade. There's no indication that he is suffering from any sort of injury. There's excuses, yes, but there's always excuses for every single team in this league. I think we're just kind of at the point where the excuses have to stop and the play has to speak for itself. That's really where I'm at with Cade. I just think that, again, despite the belief I have in him, this is the season where it has to become not just a belief, it has to become irrefutable.
No, I think that's fair. I think there's certainly pressure on the next step for Cade Cunningham to happen sooner rather than later. He can put up encouraging numbers, yes. But if you're not good enough to put up good numbers and win, that's a problem. And not that the Pistons are a playoff team this year. I don't think they have the roster to do that. They have a good enough roster to be more competitive. And if they're more competitive, can their best player, Cade Cunningham, help them win those games that they're now more competitive in? That's where you see players launch themselves into the category of star. Can you be good enough to take your team into competitive games and help them win them? Be the reason why they win them. And if Cade's that guy, if he is the franchise guy, they'll win more of those games. They can't just play competitive and lose. They did that in Cade's rookie year when it was Cade and Jeremy Grant and year 2 Sadiq Bey and year 2 Isaiah Stewart. Like, they were competitive but lost that year. That can't be the case now with some better veterans, a little bit more overall talent, and just a year 4 Cade Cunningham compared to rookie year Cade Cunningham. There has to be a step there. And so when you're talking about can they win more games, can Cade Cunningham be an all-star this year, those are all fair questions to ask, and they lie on the shoulders of Cunningham. I don't think Trajan Langdon's given this group a playoff roster yet, but he's given Cade something that he hasn't had in his career, a balanced, deeper, more veteran roster. So very interested to see what the season looks like for Cade Cunningham. I'm a big believer in him. If you asked me the question that Zach Lowe posed, over 3.5 All-Star games in his career, I'm taking the over. I think he's that guy. I've said before, I think he could be a top 10 player in the league. Maybe that's a little brash at this point, but I still think the sky is the limit for him. And I think we have to see that step towards stardom happen this upcoming year. So a big season ahead for Cade Cunningham, without a shadow of a doubt. Curious what everyone else thinks. Make sure to let us know. Let's move to Marcus Sasser real quick, because I think the interesting discussion lies around Malik Beasley and Jaden Ivey. Sasser, we've kind of talked about him a number of times throughout the offseason. I don't know if the story's really changed since Summer League and free agency. I don't think he's in a position to be a part of this rotation. I think he's going to have to spend some time in the G League working on developing point guard skills and getting reps at playing point guard. I just don't see a world where he gets minutes as a 2 right now, just because of how many guys could fill those minutes already on Detroit's roster. I just don't know where I'm at with Marcus Sasser. I feel like last year there were some great moments, and then he really cooled off and didn't give you a whole lot to work with in Summer League to give you confidence that there was gonna be a significant step in his game. And for a former first round pick, that's a little disappointing, but I'm just not sure where he stands with this team long term.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. And I think that that's kind of the difficult part about the Marcus Sasser situation this season, right? Is like, I don't think any of us feel confident that he is in the position to be a full-time backup point guard, a full-time backup shooting guard. He doesn't have the size for one. He doesn't have the playmaking chops for the other. And I just think it's very, very difficult, the situation for him, because like I said, I agree with everything you're saying, but the Pistons don't have a real backup point guard right now, right? Like, I just think that the situation is going to require him to play backup point guard minutes at this point. I don't see a way around it. And like, I hear the argument for Jaden Ivey, yes, but I at the same time think there's too much at stake for the Pistons and JB Bickerstaff to not play Cade and Ivey together. And that's just going to mean that there will be Marcus Sasser at the point guard minutes. It just seems inevitable to me. So again, this is one of those things that we're talking about. Like, it also relates to Cade, right? Like, this is not a playoff roster. This is a very imperfect roster that has a lot of holes to it. And like, I think after the last couple of years, it's easy to look at it and go, well, it's better, therefore it's good. No, it's still a bad roster. And I think that we, like, as Pistons fans, can't lose sight of that. I just don't see how you can send Marcus Sasser down to the G League unless you're willing to be like, okay, Jaden Ivey is the full-time backup point guard, and we're still going to stagger minutes. We're going to make it work, but like, he's got to come off the bench. Or Asar Thompson takes a huge leap forward in his playmaking skills. But frankly, I think you're asking more of him to do that with his lack of dribbling than you are of Marcus Sasser to just give you something for 10 minutes a game. I just think it's got to happen. And yeah, much like Cade, I think this is kind of a put up or shut up year for him, because he's going to be what, 25? Like, he's on the older side, and he's undersized. He hasn't shown really many playmaking chops in his career. Like, I just think whether it's fair or unfair, he's got to show it this year. And ultimately, I'm not super convinced that he has the skill set to do it. But unlike you, Aaron, I think it just has to happen. I think you got to throw him into the fire and just see what arises from that situation. And look, if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't work, well, hey, let's be honest. when you look at the rest of the rotation, not necessarily for guards, but like you look at Malik Beasley, you look at Tim Hardaway Jr., there's going to be trade pieces there for the Pistons. There's going to be guys that are likely going to be on the move. So if you have to pivot and get a backup point guard through trade, I think those pathways will be open later on to the Pistons during the season.
Well, I think this kind of ties in with the conversation that needs to happen around Jaden Ivey and Malik Beasley as well, because you're talking about minutes and where guys are going to fit in the rotation. And I still think you can find a way to get your point guard minutes between Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey while still starting both. And I look back at what Cleveland did under J.B. Bickerstaff last year with Donovan Mitchell and with Darius Garland, and having one of those guys on the court at all time, despite both of them starting together. And can that be mimicked in Detroit with Cunningham and Ivey? I think that's the avenue that I would prefer to see. I don't know if that will be the case because of Malik Beasley, a guy that has started a lot of games in his career, a guy that is a proven veteran that gives you multiple good NBA level skills, probably in a starting lineup that needs it. I think there's a world where we see Malik Beasley start, and that signifies to me, if that's the case, that Jaden Ivey is going to be the full-time backup point guard. I think there's a world where Detroit could get by if they did decide to start Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, playing those two at the point guard spot. And if they needed some spot minutes from Marcus Sasser, they could get them. But really, the plan would be ideally they get those minutes from Cunningham, Ivey. Maybe they go with a non-traditional route and give a few minutes to Asar Thompson. I just don't know where I'm at with Marcus Sasser at this point. But Malik Beasley comes into this equation and kind of changes things up, because I think if you hold the fan base, I think the resounding answer you get is that they'd want Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey to be the starting backcourt. I think if you look at front office and the coaching staff, I'd be preparing for Malik Beasley to be starting at the two guard spot and Jaden Ivey to be coming off the bench.
Well, I mean, I just think it relates back to what we're talking about with our very first topic, which is figuring out exactly what Cade Cunningham is capable of in this league. And genuinely, in my opinion, if you want to do that in the most effective way possible, I think you have to start Malik Beasley. I just don't see a way around it. Like, we're just getting to the point with this team where you've been rebuilding for so long that, like, at a certain point, talent has to go out the window. I know that Jaden Ivey is more talented naturally than Malik Beasley, but it doesn't fit right now, just based on what he's shown us with Cade. We just haven't seen it. And, like, I think you can talk about the backup point guard minutes, but, like, other than the second half of his rookie season, when has Jaden Ivey really shown you, outside of one or two games here or there, that, like, that is a role he is capable of filling right now? I'm not saying those things can't change. I'm just saying, like, I need to see it. At a certain point, I just need to see it. And I think that this roster, this team, where they're at, I know it's a new era under Trajan Langdon, but, like, I don't think Trajan Langdon can afford to do the things that Troy Weaver did, which was only draft best available prospect. Just put a roster out there where the guys are going to get time to play. Not move forward, not take risks. Like, you look at Troy Weaver's transactional history, the dude just did nothing with his cap space. He took no risks. He didn't swing for the fences one single time. And I think that when you talk about these Jaden Ivey minutes, like, at a certain point, is he capable of it? I don't know. I'm not convinced that he and Cade can start together as of right now. I'm willing to say that that situation can change, but, like, with Ivey, I just need to see more. I need to see more playmaking. And, like, if he's going to be the backup point guard, fine. Okay, that's great. I need to see more playmaking. If he's going to be the starting shooting guard, great, but I need to see more shooting. And, like, I think we're just kind of in between a rock and a hard place in this situation right now. Like, I don't know. Do you feel differently? Because for me, like, I just have a hard time like truly justifying, if I want Cade Cunningham to reach his ceiling, if I want the Pistons to win the most games possible, to not have Malik Beasley in that starting lineup. It just doesn't seem tenable to me.
When are you going to figure it out with Jaden Ivey, though? This is the final year of his contract before he's due for an extension. So you kind of have to figure out, does he fit with Cade Cunningham long term? Does he have the ability to morph into like this super six-man combo guard? You have to figure out where he fits with this team long term, because you have to start deciding if all of these young players that the previous regime drafted are worth the high number contract extensions that they're going to be eligible for and want. And so, yeah, you could probably start Malik Beasley because he's a better fit right now next to Cade Cunningham. But like we said, this is a very flawed roster. It's not a playoff roster if everyone's healthy. It's another developmental year. I think you have to figure out if Ivey, under a coaching staff that has experience working with these two ball-dominant guard players in the same starting lineup, I think you have to figure out if they can make it work. And if Bickerstaff and the rest of his crew can't, then maybe you look at moving Ivey at the deadline or in the offseason in a sign and trade deal.
Well,
but I just think you have to figure out where his fit is. And he has too much raw potential. And we saw too many flashes from him, especially in his rookie year, just to give up and say after last year with the coaching staff that was checked out and thinking about Cancun by November, you just can't give up on Ivey yet. I just think he has too much raw potential. We saw too many flashes year one. You have to figure out if he can fit with Cunningham, or if he's just able to play well enough that where if the fit's not here in Detroit, you can move him elsewhere for something, whether it's an asset or a player that makes more sense for you.
So you kind of beat me to it, because I was going to ask you, look, if there isn't a clear fit for Jaden Ivey by the deadline, either as a backup point guard or in the starting backcourt, do you move him? Because I think, honestly, even if it is for 25 cents on the dollar, I think at that point you kind of have to. Because, look, it's either that or you have him for next year where you still don't know what to do with him, and then you lose him as an unrestricted free agent, or you're going to have to pay him. You're going to have to try and pay him and hope he doesn't sign somewhere else because you've lost those RFA rights. So, I just think it's a very, very difficult situation. And I'm reminded of somebody like Malik Beasley. I think I've said it before in the past, even, where it's just like, look, you can be talented. You can be a good player. You can be a player that is conducive to winning basketball games. But if the fit isn't there, the fit isn't there. And if the situation isn't right, the situation just isn't right. And it's easy to cry over spilled milk when you lose that player. But I think you also have to be honest with yourself whether that player was going to reach their potential in your organization if they had stayed. And unfortunately, I just think we're kind of getting to that point with Jaden Ivey. Like, this is, for me, he is the most put up or shut up player on this entire roster. Like everybody else, even Jalen Duren, I know we have had our criticisms of his play in the past and even now, but with Jalen Duren, like, he is a useful NBA player on this roster. Like, even if it doesn't all come together this year, you can continue to talk yourself into his potential. You can continue to talk yourself into saying, look, let's give it another season, 2 seasons, whatever it may be, and then we make a decision. With Ivey, I genuinely don't see how you can go beyond this trade deadline. I don't think you can go into next offseason without knowing exactly what you are going to do with him. Or I think you've kind of pulled a Troy Weaver and you've shot yourself in the foot once again, like he did with Bojan Bogdanovic. So
I'm going to choose to remain optimistic on this front. I'm going to let the new front office, let the new coaching staff come in and see if they can make this work. Because one last thing I'll add here is Trajan Langdon didn't come in like Troy Weaver did and just tear the roster apart. it's clear that he's at least going to let this group start the season together and go from there and evaluate from there. And, I think I respect that because a lot of people commended Troy Weaver for coming in and going and getting his guys right away and, doing it the Troy Weaver way. And everyone thought that was right. And look how it turned out. So I'll commend Langdon and I'll give Bickerstaff a chance to come in and see if he can make things work and develop this team. That's Bickerstaff's job, is to develop this core and see if he can make it work. And if it doesn't, then this team definitely needs to evaluate, definitely needs to make those changes. I'm just in the camp of I want to give them this chance because they're not a playoff team anyway this year. I want to see if they can make it work with this group.
I will say one last thing before we move on. I've seen a lot of people, myself included, be like, holy crap, the wing rotation is like shooting guard, small forward, power forward. What are they going to do there? Like, there's so many options. But I think in many ways that, like, it makes a lot of sense because let's be real. Multiple of these guys are not going to be on the roster past the trade deadline. And, I'm just tired of the last 2 months of Pistons basketball, meaning absolutely nothing, because you have just nothing players on the roster doing nothing of importance. And like, that's not going to be the case this season. Even if you trade Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway and somebody else, guess what? Like, you're going to have Bobby Clintman, who's going to be able to get time. You have Ron Holland, who's going to be able to step into the role that's vacated. So there's still going to be meaningful minutes there. So yeah, I think like neither of us are giving up on anybody right now. I have my questions. I have my doubts. I think certain things need to be shown, but the advantage of the way that Trajan Langdon has gone out this season and been like, look, we're going to rebuild, but we're also going to sign players and we're going to use our cap space, is that even as the season progresses, there's not going to be meaningless games for development. Like, I don't know. I just think of like the last couple of years where it's just like you get to the end of the season, it's like, okay, the young guys are playing, but who are they playing with? Nobody. And I think when you actually give yourself a chance to have a team where you can see what they're doing at the beginning of the season, you have these vets, and if things go good, great. Then you continue with that. But if things go poorly, that's fine. You can move off of them. But these games are still going to mean something for this team. They're still going to mean something developmentally. They're still going to mean something in terms of creating that chemistry amongst the young guys. So, like, yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of my last point on that. Like, I think that regardless of what happens, whether it's with, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Beasley, or if it's with Marcus Sasser and Jaden Ivey, you're setting yourself up with the ability to move forward during the season and not just punting on the last, 8 weeks of it. So I think that's a definite positive.
No doubt that the guard position leaves a lot of intrigue, leaves a lot of question that needs to be addressed as the season opens up. And we'll probably get some clarity on the way that the Pistons plan to address the guard rotation at Media Day on Monday. Trajan Langdon, JB Bickerstaff set to open up Media Day, and then you'll hear from the roster as well. So I'm sure you'll get some clarity or some insight at some level as to what the plan for the guard rotation might look like. And they'll have a whole preseason to figure out what that may want to look like as well. You also have some guys that could absorb some guard minutes, and someone like Tim Hardaway Jr., who was mentioned a few times. There's a world where Ron Holland could get a few minutes at the two as well. And there's going to be injuries throughout the year that will open up minutes for all of these guys if they're on the roster to get some playing time. Let's take a move over into our next topic. Just going to highlight some news surrounding the Detroit Pistons. They announced their coaching staff under JB Bickerstaff, a pretty interesting group of assistant coaches. A lot of tenure here. Luke Walton and Sidney Lowe, both on the staff. Jerome Allen, who was a part of Dwayne Casey's staff previously in Detroit, is back. Kevin Burleson, obviously we've talked about previously, Fred Vincent. And then there's a few other names that were brought in alongside JB Bickerstaff. And then Jarrett Jack and Steve Scalise will remain from Monty Williams' staff. So a pretty interesting staff. I know, it's can't really break down assistant coaches. No one really on the outside knows what they do. They all have their roles. If they work with a specific group of players, or they work on a specific portion, offense, defense, if they work with the developmental guys, like we don't really know exactly what they do, but
Jarrett Jack is just there for the reaction memes. That's it.
I am
that I know. That I can tell you exactly what he does. He sits on the bench, he goes,
yeah.
Hey, you need a guy like that.
You do. I'm glad he's back. One of the few that survived. I know a name a lot of people were maybe surprised by not being mentioned on the staff was Mark Bryant, who seemingly worked a lot with Jalen Duren and James Wiseman and Isaiah Stewart last year. But he's not reportedly a part of the staff. He's not a part of the staff. It was announced by the Pistons, so not on JB Bickerstaff's coaching staff. I think that caught some people by surprise. What other newsworthy item here that's not really worth talking about too much, but the Pistons did announce a new jersey patch sponsor. That's going to be StockX, a local shoe and collectible reselling company that's based out of Detroit. They will no longer have their jersey patch sponsored by UWM, United Wholesale Mortgage. And then
what a shame.
Huge shame. But lastly, for the news section here, the Pistons did end up signing a player on Thursday. They did sign Lamar Stevens, a 6'6" forward who played most recently for the Memphis Grizzlies. It was reported as a training camp deal per Omari Sankofa. So I know a lot of people originally thought that was Detroit's 15th roster spot guy. That's not the case. They do still have that open roster spot because this is just a training camp deal. So he could end up making the roster. This also gives Detroit Lamar Stevens G League rights. But any insight in this? This is why I was hoping Mike was going to be on the podcast, because Lamar Stevens spent 3 years in Cleveland, and Mike would have been able to talk about him a lot more thoroughly than you or I probably can.
I got to be honest. And maybe Mike will come on the podcast next week and call me a total idiot, but I think he would probably say something similar to what I'm going to say, which is he's a Jag. J-A-G, just a guy. Like, he's a Jag. He's a depth piece, whether he makes the team or not, honestly, and like, no offense, but like, I don't see it being, he's 26, 27 years old. I mean, Penn State legend, obviously. He's been all over the Midwest and we love him for that. But like, Lamar Stevens to me is nothing worth writing about. He's never been a good 3-point shooter. He doesn't pass the ball. He doesn't handle the ball really. He is at best, a 14th guy on the roster. And I don't know. But that being said, now that they signed him, we're making the playoffs. So, no, I mean, it's just one of those deals that happens. It's like I remember Justin Patton. It's like where you go, Justin Patton. Yeah, Justin Patton could be something. And then you trade him a week later. And you go, well, I guess I'll never think about that guy ever again. Unfortunately, I think Lamar Stevens is kind of in that boat. Although I will say, I did kind of like him coming out of college. So what can I say? I'm a sicko.
27-year-old, 6'6", primarily power forward that shot under 30% from the 3-point line last year. Look, man, I guess he gives you some defensive chops and can help you on that end of the court, but
it's a training camp deal for a reason, yeah.
Training camp deal, if they don't find any other use for that 15th roster spot, maybe he winds up on the team. But that's just kind of what it is. Maybe there's a JB Bickerstaff connection there from his time in Cleveland that helped make this signing happen. I'm not going to read too much into that because at the end of the day, he could end up not being on the team in like 2 weeks.
I think if anything, the connection is really just JB looking at it and going, look, I know this guy plays hard. I know he's going to bust his ass. Like, let's get him in here to push the young guys, to push your Ron Hollands and your Asar Thompsons. Like, frankly, like, I think that's what he's here to do. And I hope he does it because God knows the Pistons have not had enough of that over the last few seasons. Like they haven't had enough guys who push the other guys on the roster to do better. So yeah, I hope he does.
Had several people on X say this was a sneaky good signing by the Pistons. I don't know about that, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm underestimating the impact of Lamar Stevens. Let us know what you think of the signing in the YouTube comments section. Tell us, is he making the roster or not?
If I may use an Italian expression since I'm here, va bene. Okay, allora, va bene. Okay, if you say so.
All right. Well, that wraps up our news and notes section. We do have some mailbag questions from a number of followers on X. You can always ask us questions. I took the questions on my personal Twitter at @JohnsonNBA. But if you have questions as well, you can always tweet them at Palace of Pistons as well. Let's go to this first question from at StatStufferTT. Who will be the most surprising player for the Pistons this year? Who will end up being the biggest disappointment?
Oh boy. I mean, okay. So here's the thing. When you have a team like the Pistons, it's hard to pick anybody as like a real surprise because you're looking at the back end of the roster right off the bat and going, I think this guy could be good. You know what I mean? It's not like you're in the position like the Celtics where you get a guy like I don't know, like a Sam Hauser, and you go, you know what, Sam Hauser might be something. But I'm gonna choose the most, in my opinion, obvious, but I think the best pick, Bobby Klintman. I think Bobby Klintman could definitely be a guy that surprises some people. I think if you watch Summer League, you won't be very surprised. But to the average fan, I think that he definitely is going to get an opportunity to surprise a lot of people. Not just with his size, which I think I was very surprised by looking at him in Summer League where I went, oh, this guy's got an NBA body. But his passing ability, his defensive acumen, I think that if you're looking at one player on this roster who could end up being more than what he was drafted to be, what he was expected to be, it has to be Bobby Klintman. Like the dude just has a little something, and I don't know if it's going to develop into anything. I mean, you're talking to oh my God, who was the guy? Anthony oh my God, I shouldn't even have brought it up. Sorry. But Anthony Randolph, former Anthony Randolph stan over here, if for those who remember. Sometimes guys with those kind of chops, nothing ever happens. But I think if somebody could, it's Bobby Klintman. If we're talking biggest disappointment, oh, this hurts to say. I think, unfortunately, Jaden Ivey. And while I have still a lot of belief and love for Jaden Ivey, and I want him to succeed here, I still think he's one of the best prospects on this roster. It is hard for me to see where he fits in at the end of the day. And unless there, like I said earlier, is like a huge leap in his playmaking chops or a huge leap in his shooting ability, I just have a hard time seeing exactly like when you look at the improved rotation, both for the guards and the wings for the Pistons, like where it's going to come together for him unless those leaps happen. So unfortunately, I think I have to pick Jaden Ivey. There is another player on the roster I think is also a very good candidate. I'm interested to see if you pick him because he was another very, very high draft pick. So Aaron, lay it on me, brother.
So this is an interesting question, and I don't know how I want to approach it. I guess most surprising doesn't mean like breakout, but I think surprising, I think like, oh, like I didn't know this guy, was capable of this or something like that. And so for that reason, I'll go a little off the wall here. I'll go Simone Fontecchio, because if you were a normal person and you weren't watching a 14-win Piston team in March of last year, you probably don't know much about Simone Fontecchio. And I think he's going to be in the starting lineup for this team. I think you're going to see his production. I think you're going to see his efficiency. I think you're going to see him be able to hold his own defensively and end up being a pretty key player for Detroit. He might rival Tobias Harris for being the best forward this year on the team. And so I think that's going to surprise some people because Simone Fontecchio, and this isn't just purely Italian bias. Some of it, fine, I'll admit, it is Italian bias. But he actually can really play, and he can impact the game on both ends of the floor. And for those that didn't watch last year, maybe they give the Pistons a chance at the start of this upcoming season. I think they're going to be surprised to see him go out there and make the plays that he's capable of making and have the impact that I think he's set to have. I do think he's going to start. I think he's going to be a starter, and I think he's going to be a key player for this team. If you watched them last year and you were a psycho like us, you know what he's capable of. And there was a true, real chemistry with him and Cade Cunningham last year that I'm really interested in seeing what it grows into this upcoming season.
I think it's only a surprise for people that didn't watch him play and for fans that didn't watch him in Utah, because we were so excited when they traded for him. I mean, look, let's be honest. I think it's probably going to go down as, and I'm writing this in my piece about the Wings, our preview for the Wings. I think he's probably going to go down as the best non-draft acquisition of the entire Troy Weaver era. I feel fairly confident in saying so because he was just so awesome last year, man, wasn't he?
That and the Pistons got him back on a really, really team-friendly contract this offseason. So, yeah, I'll pick Simone Fontecchio. Biggest disappointment. I could use my cop-out answer here. A guy that I've seemingly spent the entire offseason talking down on in Marcus Sasser. But I'll go somewhere else with this. I think this is where you were thinking I might go. And that's Jalen Duren. Because if Jalen Duren doesn't take a step forward this year and he doesn't take a serious step defensively, it's really, really disappointing. And it puts you in a tough spot because he's due for that same extension that Jaden Ivey is this upcoming summer. So Jalen Duren could end up being the most disappointing. You have to hope he's not. You have to hope he's one of their breakout players because the raw talent, the sheer athleticism, the size that he has, all those things are through the roof. But there's a chance he's a significant disappointment. And the Pistons may not want to commit to him long term if that's the case. There already were rumblings that, Langdon was looking to change up the center spot in Detroit. He did bring in Paul Reed. He claimed him straight off waivers and committed $8 million to him this year. So he's got to like him. So they might not have, Duren might be on a short fuse here if he comes out and disappoints. You got to hope that's not the case. But I certainly think he's a candidate. I don't know. Does someone like Asar Thompson have a case? If he can't come out and shoot and impact the game offensively, if he's just kind of that same really, good defender, helps you on the glass, but doesn't get you anything offensively, so it makes it tough to play him a ton. I don't know. I think he's gonna be better. He really can't be worse than he was last year, but I think, if he's not better, that's kind of concerning. That's kind of disappointing.
I mean, so for me, it's actually interesting they said Duren because over the last few weeks, I've kind of come around to the idea that, I think this is the year where he's going to prove, frankly, us wrong about him. I think that when you have a coach with a track record, especially defensively with bigs, like JB Bickerstaff does, I just think this is the year Jalen Duren. I think this is the year we're going to see what he is. And that's why I'm not putting it as a biggest surprise because I think we all know what he's capable of. The guy I actually thought, and this is the other guy that I was thinking of taking, was Ron Holland.
Yeah.
And we're talking about disappointment. I'm not saying overall in his career, but I think for this year specifically, I think you're going to see a lot of people disappointed in the role that he has for this team because we saw it in Summer League. He's still a ways away. Maybe he's more scoring wise at a better place than Asar Thompson was. I wouldn't say more offensively talented, because I think Asar was still a better passer, a better offensive rebounder. And for me, those are parts of offense. Like those are important things for offensive players. But I just think when you look at like the rotation and where he is on both ends of the court, I just have a hard time seeing him carving out a big role this season. So I think when you're looking at the 5th overall pick, and he's maybe only getting 5th, I mean, let's be honest, like, can you see him genuinely, Aaron? Can you see him getting more than 15 minutes per game until the end of the season, right? Like until before the trade deadline? Can you really see a viable path to him getting more than 15 minutes a game? Because I don't.
I can't.
I don't.
I think that's a really good answer. I kind of want to change my answer to Ron Holland now because of that. Because you're going to spend a top 5 pick on a guy that, in all likelihood, is going to be spending time in the G League, is not going to be a part of your opening night rotation. Again, a top 5 pick, maybe to the general fan, they don't understand how poor this past year's draft class was compared to previous years, but it's still disappointing because it doesn't look like there's a clear role for him, despite this team still being in very clearly a developmental stage, a developmental season. I don't think he looked ready for 20 minutes a night, and based on what he did in summer league, I get that he got his points and he hunted his shot, but there was a lot of question marks there in his summer league performance. So, and it's not like that's the end of the world. Like, just because he doesn't have a huge role at the start of the season, doesn't mean it was a bust of a pick or a waste of a pick. It's just he might take some time to become an NBA player. I think that's okay, but it's going to be disappointing when you see a top 5 pick shooting up for the Motor Cruise.
It's totally fine. And like, again, I think that just brings it back to what I was saying earlier, where it's just like, well, this is why it's okay to have a deep rotation at the wings. You go, well, we can't play our number 5 overall pick, but that's not the worst thing in the world. Like, they played a number 5 overall pick last year with a similar profile that wasn't ready. Just wasn't ready. Asar Thompson was not ready in a lot of ways. And the roster around him wasn't ready to support a player with his skill set at that point, or in some cases, lack of a skill set. And I think that you're in the same place with Ron Holland, but this time you actually have the players in place to where you can justify not playing him 25, 30 minutes a night. With Asar, it was like, well, this guy's not ready, but like, who are we going to play? Like, genuinely, we're going to play Kevin Knox over him? Why? Who cares? Kevin Knox is nothing at this point. And like, I don't know. I just think that you're like in a much healthier place in your roster. I think it also kind of feeds into what I was saying about Jaden Ivey in terms of like, perhaps you do need to trade him at the deadline because this is a new era. He's not a Trajan Langdon pick. Ron Holland is. And I think if Jaden Ivey doesn't show those real point guard chops, can you really justify keeping him on the roster while you also need to ramp up Asar and Ron Holland's minutes to, at this point, non-shooters? I think it becomes a very, very difficult thing to justify. And like, I think that's another reason why, like I said, he's my player. I think is the one who could disappoint because I think that there's genuinely a good shot he's not on this roster at the end of the year. Unfortunately, and I don't like that. I don't want to say that because I still believe in his talent, but like when you look at who else is on the roster, what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go, he's the one that most easily doesn't fit in, right?
All fair concerns. Let's move on to our next question. This comes from @Pistons Next. If Detroit does sign a point guard with their open roster spot during or after training camp, then do you see this as a sign they may not be high on either of Ivey or Sasser and are looking to potentially upgrade from them?
Well, yeah. Frankly, I think it's kind of crazy that they haven't signed a point guard yet. Like, no, I again, outside of like 3 months at the end of his rookie year, I didn't see anything from Jaden Ivey that was like, okay, this guy is is the, number 2 guard of the future. I guess like we were saying earlier in regards to Cleveland's situation where it's Mitchell and Garland, right? And you can make that work. But who did they have before that? Colin Sexton and Garland. And like I think that there's honestly a bigger chance that it's more of that situation than this situation. And like when you look at it, ultimately Garland and Sexton didn't work out. And that's not a knock on either player. It's just kind of how it is. And like obviously Marcus Sasser is not in that same kind of discussion, but no, I think whether they have confidence in Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser or not, I still think you need to go out and sign another point guard. Because you can't just you're an NBA franchise, you're a GM. You can't leave it up to chance. You can't leave it up to, well, I believe in this, I believe in that. You need to cover your bases at the end of the day. So, no, I think, yes, it does show that they wouldn't have full confidence in either guy. And honestly, I don't think they should at this point.
Well, I think that this was probably my biggest issue with the offseason was that they didn't add another point guard to the team because, like you said, even with Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser, I felt they needed another point guard. Cade Cunningham has missed games every year he's been in the league. Jaden Ivey has missed games before. You just need depth. You need a point guard. I mean, you saw last year how much the Pistons missed the potential impact of Monte Morris when he started, the first 3-4 months of the season out. And if you end up in that situation again where you don't have that point guard depth, it's just really hard to play competitive basketball. You need a guy out there that can get you organized, that can get you in your system, get you in your offense, and run the show. And I've already shared my concerns with Marcus Sasser being able to do that. It's not something Jaden Ivey was asked to do a whole ton last year. So we don't know what that learning curve is going to be like for him this year if he does get point guard minutes. So, yeah, it would have been really nice if this team added a veteran point guard. I know Mike previously threw out Corey Joseph as a name. I think that's disrespectful to everyone that's watched the last 4 or 5 years of Detroit Piston basketball. But someone of that ilk, a guy that's been...
Rodney Stuckey.
Someone that's been around and has the experience. Like, man, if there was a world where Chris Paul would have came to the Pistons on a 1-year, $20 million deal, I hope the Pistons would have done it because I think it would have just been great for this team to have someone like that as a player. Like, he could still help you, but to also mentor and teach the young guards they have on their roster. So that was probably my biggest disappointment. I don't think it necessarily means someone like Ivey's on the hot seat. If they added another point guard, I think Sasser's already on the hot seat just because he hasn't shown what his position is in the NBA yet, and he's 6 foot and he doesn't have playmaking skills right now. I felt like Detroit needed to add another point guard regardless. I still think they should, and you're going to end up seeing that once Cade has to miss a week or two with something, or Ivey has to miss a week or two with something. Because they just don't have the guard depth, the point guard depth specifically beyond them.
I think you bring up a great point when you talk about Chris Paul, because look, while I've said I think Trajan Langdon has done a good job of bringing more legitimate veterans into this locker room during the offseason rather than like Corey Joseph or whatever. Guys that have been a part of winning teams. Even if they haven't been stars, they've been a part. And like, I actually think learning how to be a role player is something that's very, very important for most players in the NBA, because ultimately that's where 95% of careers end up is as a role player. But yeah, I think when you bring up Chris Paul, I think you bring up an excellent point because like, look, if you do want Marcus Sasser, if you do want Jaden Ivey to develop into point guards, I don't see how you can do that if you don't have somebody who can teach them how to do it properly, right? Like point guard it's by far the hardest position to play in the NBA And like, we're very lucky as fans to have as many good point guards as we do. But like, it is so difficult because you are the leader of the team in many ways, both on and off the court, in the locker room, on, in end of game situations. If you don't have a guy who can put everything together, and again, this is where Chris Paul is a great example of something you want. You're in trouble. And like, when you have that guy versus when you don't have that guy, it makes all the difference in the world. Chris Paul was 90% washed when he went to Phoenix. And yet they made the NBA Finals just because he understands how to play winning basketball and how to push young players forward. It is not a coincidence that DeAndre Ayton played the best basketball of his career with Chris Paul kicking his ass every single night. And so I think it's one of those things where it's like, not just for Cade, for the point guards, but also for somebody like Jalen Duren. Having a legitimate veteran point guard on the roster, to me, it is the biggest oversight of the offseason, and it is something that I truly still am really looking at them to rectify, because I think a lot of the questions we have about this team could be answered in a way that we want it to be answered with somebody like that on the roster. You need it. You need someone who can go, all right, everybody calm down. I got this. Let's play basketball. Simple as that.
Last question here. And again, this is where we're really missing the leader of the ship, Mike. This is from, I'm just going to say the first two letters because I'm not sure how to pronounce your Twitter name, but it's from @DB. Curious how you think JB will shape the Pistons culture this season. I'll go first here quickly. I think, can JB do what he did in Cleveland? Can he build their culture around defense? Can he build the culture in Detroit that for year after year, for GM after GM, for coach after coach, for player after player, they've all come in and said, we want to be like the old Pistons teams, the bad boys, the going to work Pistons, built on defense, built on toughness, built on grittiness, built on protecting our home court. Can he do that? Could he be the coach that actually breaks through and does what years and years of former Detroit Pistons employees and players have said they've wanted to do, but have utterly failed at doing? He has a history of being able to build a top-of-the-line defense. Can he do it in Detroit and fix this ship? That's what I'm looking for. Can he establish their defensive, tough culture that this organization has said they've wanted to get back to, but so consistently failed at?
One word: accountability. Accountability, no matter what job you do, nothing will work if everybody isn't accountable for their own actions. Whether it's your boss, whether it's you, whether it's the person working underneath you, it doesn't matter. If there's no accountability, it won't work, because that's how you breed resentment. Forget basketball. In any relationship you have in this world, if there is not accountability by all parties involved, it will not work, period. I think when I look at JB Bickerstaff, that's what I think he's going to bring to this organization: accountability on both ends of the floor, on and off the court. And while Monty Williams, he said a lot about those things, but he didn't really follow through in any way, because he still had his... I mean, come on. Killian Hayes was starting for the first, 20 games of the season. That's not accountability. You know what I mean? Troy Weaver, that's not a guy who was accountable for any of his actions, just kept kicking the can down the road, never admitted his real mistakes that he made, because he was too scared to take a chance on anything, to where he'd actually have to fess up to whether he made a mistake or not. And I think that was true of Monty Williams. I think, unfortunately, it's largely true of Tom Gores, a guy who, again, says, "Oh, I'm accountable for this, I'm accountable for that." I'll give him somewhat of a pass in the sense that, like, hey, he fired Monty Williams and he fired Troy Weaver despite having given them a lot of money last year. So, like, okay, that's a start. But, like, for me, when I look at JB Bickerstaff, you look at his teams in Cleveland, and yes, it ran its course. But I think a reason why it ran its course is because of that accountability. Like, he held everybody to a certain standard on both ends of the court. And look, if guys weren't performing, it doesn't matter if you're young. It doesn't matter if you're the future of the franchise. We're going to go with what is going to work. And I know that, like, Dwayne Casey did that to a certain extent and people didn't always like it, but, like, there is a reason the Dwayne Casey teams were better than last year's team, right? Like, there's a reason guys liked playing for Dwayne Casey, why veterans re-signed with a team that was led by Dwayne Casey, because there was genuine, true accountability. They didn't have the talent, it didn't have the coaching staff, but, like, there was that. And so, like, I think when I look at it, when you have a better roster, more veterans, more young talent, I think that is the number one thing JB Bickerstaff is going to bring to this organization is accountability.
Well, that is this week's Palace of Pistons podcast. A whole lot jam-packed in to this final episode of...
Well, Aaron, what about you? What do you think he's going to bring? You didn't answer the question.
I did.
People need to know.
I talked about it. The culture, the defense, the toughness.
The defense. Okay, sorry.
Come on.
Whatever.
It's
late, dude. I'm sorry.
Italy.
It's late. I'm in another country. Okay. All right. Yeah, we definitely need to wrap this up.
I get it's 1 a.m. in Italy, but give me a break.
Sorry, man. I forget not every
espresso, my guy. Come on.
I forget not everybody rambles as long as I do. My bad.
Well, with that, it actually has been another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. When we're back next week, we're talking about, and we are in the new season of Detroit Pistons basketball. So excited for each and every single one of you to be along for the ride. Make sure you are following our page. You are subscribed. You are liking the content. You are commenting and telling us what you think. Let us know. We need all of your support as we get into the new season ahead. That's going to do it for this week's show from myself, Aaron Johnson, and my very tired co-host, Jasper Apollonia. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we will see you guys next week for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.